My wife cheated and moved to Sweden with our kids, so I devised a plan to bring her back to the U.S. for revenge, only to find out through a paternity test that only one child was mine. Hey, buckle up, because this is going to be a long one. So, I'm a 37-year-old guy, married to my 36-year-old wife for 11 years, and we've got 2 kids, a 3-year-old boy and an 8-year-old boy. They mean the world to me. My wife and I met years ago when we worked at a retail store together, and we hit it off. So here's where things start getting messy. When our first son was born, my mom came to see him and casually mentioned that the baby didn't look like either of us. She didn't say this in front of everyone, thankfully. Honestly, I'm not great at seeing family resemblances in newborns, but apparently, older relatives have some kind of superpower for that sort of thing. Anyway, my mom's always been a bit of a troublemaker, so I brushed it off. I was so in love with my kid that I didn't let her remark get to me. Fast forward to a few years later, and things took a turn for the worse. I saw a notification pop up on my wife's phone from someone named Charlie. The message read, "I'll remember last night for a long time," and that immediately set off alarm bells for me. She was supposed to be out watching a movie with her girlfriends, so this didn't add up at all. I couldn't check more right then because she was in the room, but as soon as I got the chance, I dove into her phone. Sure enough, the profile picture confirmed it was the same Charlie we both knew from back when we worked at the store. I hadn't kept in touch with him, and I didn't think she had either. My gut was twisting the whole time because I was scared of what I might find, but I couldn't stop myself from looking. Turns out, my worst fears were confirmed. They had obviously slept together the night before. She had straight U. P lied to my face and left the house just for that. It's hard to put into words how betrayed I felt. The worst part was not knowing how long this affair had been going on. Was it recent? Had it been happening for years? It was driving me nuts. I knew I had to confront her, but had no idea how to go about it. First, I took screenshots of the incriminating messages and sent them to myself as evidence. I didn't want to give her any room to deny what I already knew. When she got home, I didn't say anything right away. I needed time to think through every angle and prepare myself for the confrontation. The next day, I was ready. I started by casually asking if she'd heard from Charlie lately. She looked shocked but tried to play dumb, asking, "Who's Charlie?" I reminded her that he was our co-worker's brother, and she gave me this long "oh," but still didn't answer my question. So I pressed her again. That's when the lies started to unravel. She hesitated before saying she hadn't heard from him in ages. I could tell she was mentally weighing whether I was just asking out of the blue or if I knew something. She quickly backpedaled, saying, "Actually, I think we spoke recently." I kept pushing, asking why she hadn't mentioned it to me. The conversation got more awkward, and she said something about them not talking every day, shrugging it off. I suggested reaching out to him to catch up, and she froze. I could see she was panicking. I chuckled, even though I didn't find any of this funny, and said, "I know," in a way that made it clear I wasn't guessing. She looked almost angry, asking, "What do you know?" I told her I knew about her and Charlie and begged her not to insult me by pretending otherwise. She went silent and then started crying, burying her face in her hands. I had seen her cry before, but this time it only made me angrier. I felt like she didn't think about the consequence. While she was with Charlie, but now she wanted me to feel sorry for her tears? I was beyond pissed off. Eventually, she looked up with red, puffy eyes, and that's where the story picks up next. All right, let me expand on that text with a more casual tone. So, she was all wet from crying and kept saying how sorry she was. She claimed it was just the one time and that she regretted it right away. She said she was vulnerable and made a massive mistake, but for some reason, I just didn't buy it. I had this gut feeling she was lying about only sleeping with him once. So I decided to bluff and told her I knew it wasn't just one time. I demanded she tell me the whole truth because I already knew everything. I even threw in that Charlie's brother, our ex-co-worker, had spilled the beans to me. That's when she started bawling even louder, which was super annoying. I pressed her again for the truth, and she admitted she had slept with him a few times, but not more than 10. Seriously? Trying to downplay cheating by saying it was less than 10 times? I couldn't believe it. I lost my cool, picked up a ceramic ornament from the table, and threw it against the wall. It's crazy to think someone would say they cheated less than 10 times, like that makes it better. I told her I wanted a divorce and started to leave the room. Before I left, I told her I was getting a paternity test for our kids, and that was non-negotiable. She looked like she was losing it, and I had never seen her that upset before. But honestly, I didn't care. I was worried she might do something crazy, so I called my kids and told them we were going out for ice cream. It was late, but not too late, and I needed to make sure she'd pull herself together before I came back. I could handle her craziness, but I didn't want my boys to see their mom in that state. I wasn't feeling sorry for her. I was just protecting my sons. She seemed okay as I took them out. Before leaving, I whispered to her to get herself together, Beth. Or we got back in an hour. I took the boys out for some ice cream, and it was a nice little break in the midst of all this drama. I love my kids, and they always brighten my day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they might not be mine. It was painful to think about. I've been there for these kids for so long, and now I was just hoping they were really mine. As much as I didn't want them to grow up in a broken home, it was better for them to have a mother and father, right? But if they weren't mine, I wasn't sure I could stay in their lives. I know that sounds bad, but it's easier said than done. Knowing they were a result of my wife's infidelity would be a constant reminder, and they didn't deserve that. So my wife and I still lived in the same house after all this. We barely spoke, maybe 10 sentences in a week. I was sleeping on the couch. If you're wondering why I didn't kick her out, it was because I didn't want to worry my sons. They'd eventually need to know, but I was trying to keep things normal for them. By the end of that week, I handed her the divorce papers, and again, she started crying. I couldn't tell if her tears were real or if she just couldn't handle the consequences. I told her to sign the papers and that during the divorce process, we'd get a paternity test. If she hadn't been unfaithful, there was nothing to worry about, right? Anyway, this is where things get really messy, and it's why I'm writing this. I thought I could handle a simple divorce, but then things got complicated. One day, I was heading to work, and my wife said she wasn't feeling well and wouldn't go to work. She looked like she'd been crying all night, but I didn't care. I left her at home with our sons. It was the weekend, so they didn't need to go to a cousin's place or anything. When I got back, the house was eerily quiet. I called out for my wife and sons, but no one answered. That was worrying because there was no reason for them to be out so late. I went to my son's room and saw it was emptier, with a lot of their clothes gone. I panicked and checked our bedroom. A lot of my wife's clothes were gone too, and so were the suitcases. It hit me then. She had taken the kids and left. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation I'd come across later, but it seemed unlikely. I checked my phone, no messages or calls from her. She didn't want me to know what she'd done. Yep, my wife had basically kidnapped my kids, and I had no idea where they were. You can imagine how freaked out I was. It's hard to even begin describing what I was feeling in that moment because it was such a whirlwind of emotions. I was worried, panicked, furious, scared, and confused all at once. I started calling everyone I could think of, friends, relatives in the city and nearby towns, even some of her co-workers. But no one had seen or heard from my wife. She wasn't picking up her phone either. For 2 whole days, I had no idea where she was. While I knew my kids weren't in immediate danger, it seemed like this was a very deliberate move on her part. By the end of those 2 days, I was ready to involve the police because I needed to know where she had taken our children. I knew calling the cops right away would be a stressful ordeal, so I made one last-ditch effort to reach out to people close to her. One of her best friends had heard from her but didn't know where she was. Finally, I called her parents again, and that's when I learned she had taken our kids to her parents' place in Sweden. Yes, she flew our children out of the country. At that point, my emotions boiled down to one thing: pure rage. I don't think I've ever been that angry in my entire life, and there was nothing I could do about it because she still wasn't answering my calls. I wanted to break things and yell at someone, but I knew that would only lead to more chaos. So here's where things stand. My wife is in Sweden with our kids, won't answer her phone, and I don't have, and know exactly where her parents live over there since I've never been. Sure, I could track her down and maybe get her parents to tell me, but then what? Would I just forcefully bring my children back to the U.S.? What's my game plan? I knew I could find her if I really wanted to, but I needed to figure out what to do next. That's why I'm reaching out to you all for help. First off, I'm pretty sure there's got to be some legal stuff that says she can't just take our kids out of the country when we have joint custody. Any of you legal-savvy folks who can shed some light on this would be a huge help. Thanks. Edit. Well, she finally reached out to me, and I completely lost it on her. I needed to vent, and I went off on her for about 10 minutes straight. After that, she just went silent for half a minute, and then tried to tell me she only took the kids to visit her parents. I called her a liar, with a string of expletives, because how stupid does she think I am? She bought 2 plane tickets, vanished, flew to another continent, and ghosted me for almost a week. She tried to gaslight me real bad by claiming she forgot to tell me. At that point, I just hung up on her. I've been in a foul mood ever since. Edit 2. You guys are amazing. Someone mentioned the Hague Convention on International Child Abduction in the comments, and that cleared up a lot of my questions about the legal side of things. I'm ready to lawyer up and do what's necessary to get my kids back and hopefully get her some jail time for this mess. I'll keep you all updated on how things go. Update 1. Hey everyone, back with a big update. My wife took our kids and ran away to Sweden without even asking me. She didn't even inform me. She just left sneakily while I was at work and refused to contact me for nearly a week. This was infuriating. I finally contacted a lawyer, different from my divorce lawyer, to help get my children back. A commenter on my previous post mentioned an international treaty related to child abduction, which made a lot of progress possible for me. That treaty is called the Hague Convention on the Civil Aspects of International Child Abduction. I'll break it down as best I can. I'm not a legal expert, just trying to make it clear. If a parent takes a child to another state without the other parent's permission, it can classify as abduction or kidnapping. With local police on your side, it should be relatively easy to sort out. But what if the child is taken outside the country? American police can't directly help, hence the need for the international treaty. It looks at where the child usually lives, their habitual residence, and whether they were wrongfully removed. For my kids, their habitual residence was clearly the U.S., making it easy to establish they were wrongfully removed. My lawyer was super helpful, explaining everything and then taking over with the actual legal stuff, filing paperwork, contacting local authorities and all that. I didn't sweat the details since I trusted him to handle it. I made it very clear to my wife that I had called the police and got a lawyer involved. I was trying to get help to bring my son back, but she didn't seem to care. She told me she wasn't going to stand by and let me break the family, which I thought was ridiculous. I mean, she took off to another country with our son's show. Is that not breaking the family? I figured her excuse was total BS. She was clearly scared of what I'd find with a paternity test. That was my take on the situation anyway. My lawyer sent a notice to her and her parents in Sweden, spelling out the consequences of not bringing the kids back. Sure, we could easily get my son's return thanks to that Hague Treaty and the local police, but the lawyer thought it was smart to let her know how serious this was, especially the criminal implications. Part of me hoped she'd comply so things could go smoothly, but another part of me wanted her to be stubby. Born, so she'd end up in serious trouble. The notice to her parents had the same basic info, but also mentioned that they were basically acting as accomplices to the abduction. We gave her a week to return the boys to the U.S. Fast forward a week, and my in-laws called me. After some small talk, it was clear they were struggling to get to the point. After too many awkward pauses, they finally said they didn't agree with her actions and had tried to convince her to come back, but she wouldn't listen. They were asking me to be patient, promising they'd keep trying. I told them I wasn't going to do anything my lawyer didn't advise, and since the deadline had passed, she would have to face whatever came next. She stopped answering my calls, though her parents still did. The whole thing was beyond frustrating, and I felt like I was losing my mind. She didn't seem to care about the legal trouble she was in. The good news was that my lawyer called and said we got the green light to get the boys back. Honestly, my emotions were all over the place. I was scared she might do something drastic. Apparently, the Swedish police went to her parents' house, and while she wasn't arrested, she finally agreed to send the kids back to the U.S. I was so relieved. My sons were coming home, and this saga could finally end, and maybe we could get back to a normal life. My boys did come back, but my wife was nowhere to be seen. It was such a mix of emotions. Seeing my boys after weeks was so emotional, but I was also mad that she wasn't there. It meant the divorce couldn't proceed, and she wouldn't face the law for what she did. I tried calling her, but no answer. Life went on for a bit until I finally took the boys for a paternity test. I knew it wouldn't hold up in court, but I had to know. That's why I thought she had run away. My heart shattered when I saw the results. The 3-year-old was mine, which was a relief. But the 8-year-old? I can't even describe how hopeless I felt. I found out that the boy I'd raised and loved wasn't mine. I felt so broken. I even took him for another test, hoping the first one was wrong, but it wasn't. Every time I looked at him, I felt so sad. It wasn't his fault, but I didn't know if I could keep loving him the same way. I feared I'd end up favoring my biological son. My wife's betrayal was all I could think of when I looked at him. I still loved him, but I wasn't sure for how long. And my wife was nowhere to be found. I couldn't even direct my anger at her. She ignored my calls, as expected. I wanted to call her parents, but didn't want to drag them into more drama. Eventually, I did call them, thinking I had a plan to get her back to the U.S. I told them I really needed to talk to her, that I wanted us to be a family again. 2 days later, she called me, and I gave her this spiel about how I knew I nearly broke the family, but I did the paternity test, and I found out both boys were mine. I apologized and said I wouldn't go through with the divorce, and that I'd apologize to her every day until she forgave me. She totally bought it. She seemed surprised about the paternity test, but tried not to show it. She flew back to the U.S. yesterday, and we met up briefly. Man, it's been a roller coaster of emotions lately. I had this pretty intense reunion, but the kicker is that she has no idea the whole thing was just a plan to get her back into the country. Currently, I'm chilling at a hotel because I promised her I'd give her the house for a few days to avoid any awkwardness. But trust me, things are about to get a whole lot more awkward. I'm all set to kick off the divorce proceedings, but first, I've contacted the police to ensure she's not going anywhere. I'll keep you guys posted on how this all unfolds. Life's been super tough, but honestly, I'm just relieved things have somewhat balanced out, even if I'm nowhere near as happy as I was a year ago. So yeah, I managed to get my wife back into the States, as I mentioned before. Once she was back, I got in touch with the police and my lawyer to make sure everything was set up for her to face the consequences. I needed to make sure she paid for everything she put me through. It took a couple of days, but finally, there was a knock on the door while her son was at school. Yeah, it hurts to write her son, but I've come to terms with the truth. So, the police showed up and asked her to come with them. It wasn't a dramatic scene since she didn't resist or ask many questions. As she was being taken away, she shot me a look and I couldn't help but smirk. She didn't stay in jail long, though. Her family bailed her out pretty quickly, but at least it made it harder for her to flee the country again. This allowed me to get the divorce rolling. The whole divorce saga wrapped up even before her court case concluded. I gotta say, I've had more court in my life than I ever want again. The divorce was pretty straightforward, especially considering she had run off with both of my kids. A court-ordered paternity test confirmed what I already knew: only one of the kids was mine. This made it easier for my lawyer to argue that her abduction was motivated by her infidelity. Even without the screenshots, I think my lawyer would have nailed it. It was a moment to remember when the paternity test results came out. She looked absolutely shocked, and as she turned to me, I just shook my head and laughed because I already knew. Given that she was a cheater and had committed a crime by abducting my child, the judge had no sympathy for her. I got full custody of my biological child while she had to manage her 8-year-old. I didn't lose the house, the car, or have to pay any alimony. The judge even suggested she find and reconcile with the real father of the other kid. That stung because it made it all too real that there was another man out there whose kid I'd been raising without knowing. It hurt a lot, to be honest. Anyway, that was the end of the divorce proceedings, and it was incredibly tough to come to terms with saying goodbye to the boy I thought was my son. I know some of you might think I look like a jerk on paper and maybe I should have adopted him. But trust me, until you're in my shoes, you can't fully understand how hard that decision was. She eventually went to court for the international child abduction charges, and I had to be there for every single session. I had to make statements and take the stand, which was a massive hassle, but in the end, she went to prison. It wasn't for as long as I would have liked, only 18 months since the abduction was brief. The kids were well cared for, and only one was biologically mine. The judge was pretty lenient, considering she still had another child to look after. For anyone, 18 months in prison is tough, but I wished it was at least 5 years. My lawyer was also bummed about the sentence. In the end, I came out on top in the divorce and at least got custody of my biological child. That was probably the only thing that kept me from going off the deep end. I also succeeded in getting her jailed for kidnapping my child, which I see as a consequence of her cheating. Her life isn't going to be easy without me, especially with a criminal record and losing her job after running off to Sweden. I make sure everyone knows the full story, which is always satisfying. I feel a bit sorry for the other kid, but hopefully she'll get the real dad to step up, whether that's Charlie or not. Her parents called and apologized profusely after everything. They still want to be involved in the child's life, and I have a soft spot for them, so I agreed to make arrangements as long as I never have to see their daughter again. If they stick to that, things will be fine. So there it is. I've been living as a single dad, and life has been one crazy rid. Even though it's really tough, it's also super rewarding. I just hope I can keep my spirits up as the years pass. I hope there's something in my experiences that you all can learn from. So maybe you won't have to go through the same struggles I did.